This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Today, we are talking about holiday stress and managing expectations on raising me. And if you are new to the podcast, I am so glad you're here. I'm Adrienne Stein, and this is where we take parenting challenges and questions straight to the experts for advice, while stopping for some self-reflection and finding ways to help ourselves along the way. Right now is supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year. The song says so, right? Yet it's not for so many people and for many valid reasons. For all the great and wonderful things that come around the holidays, there are things that can really get us down. Let's just start with the pressure. There's so much pressure. Family dynamics, finances, maybe travel, all the stuff going on with the kids, end of year work deadlines, events. What about those grieving, whether it's grieving a death or a loss of a relationship? So we're going to sit down with Theresa Petrosky. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor with Maine Behavioral Healthcare. And we're talking about the signs and symptoms of excessive stress, why we might be feeling this way. And by the way, it is okay to feel this way. And we're talking about ways to cope and deal, along with when it might be time to get some professional help. So let's dive in. Theresa, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today about holiday stress and managing all the expectation around it. So as we just kind of dive in right now, help us to not feel alone in this. How common is holiday stress, and what do you see as some of the most likely causes of it?
So at least depending on what numbers or data you're looking at, and if you're looking at pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, you're looking from anywhere from a quarter of the population or half of the population is going to experience some level of holiday stress. And we know that that number does go up for parents. So if it's a quarter of the population that's experiencing holiday stress, then a third of the population is going to be experiencing holiday stress in our parents.
And, you mentioned parents and just all of the things that come with, being a parent around the holidays can certainly cause stress. But what are some of the other major causes of stress, particularly around the holidays?
It's going to be one of the biggest causes I'm going to see is going to be routine changes, especially when we're thinking of little children. So there might be later bedtimes or they're not in school. But then other things that you might see is that additional financial pressure that we might have, whether that's preparing for the bigger meals that we might have or preparing to spend money on those gifts that we want to give to everybody.
Gift giving is a major one. And then on top of that, I think, for parents and really just adults around this time, you have work obligations, deadlines are usually coming. You have parties that, maybe you're hosting the holidays this year. There are school events, finances, as you alluded to. So just all working together, it can be really overwhelming. So how do we identify the signs or the symptoms of stress that actually need to be addressed?
That's a good question, because a lot of times people will have the holiday blues, or we might feel a little stressed or overwhelmed. But when we're getting to that clinical stress or that clinical, we might need to go talk to our PCP or another professional, will be, is this lasting? Are these symptoms starting to impact my functioning? And for functioning, for parents, it might be like, I feel too tired to join my children in playing, or I feel so irritable that I don't even want to spend time with my kids right now. It can also be just noticing, again, like I don't feel the same level of pleasure. I'm noticing a little bit less joy in my season, but it's lasting. So it's more than just this, one day I might feel stressed as I start to think about all the to-do list. I'm staying in that state of mind. I'm staying with that thought of like, I can't do this. It's not going to be well. Or what if all these things go wrong?
And when you say it's lasting, is it more than a day or two? Or are we talking, this is something that is going on for weeks?
It depends, but we're usually we're getting into like 2 or more weeks when we're talking about like a depressive symptoms setting in. So it's definitely usually more than a day or two, but we're getting into 2 or more weeks. And again, we're looking at, is this something that I'm feeling this way? And it's kind of as the holiday season's over, I'm starting to come back and feel more like myself, or is as the holiday season starting to be over and I'm still sitting in that space of like, I don't feel great. This wasn't what I expected, and just staying stuck in that thought.
And that would be when it would be time to seek help. But you mentioned something else about like seasonal blues. Can you share a little bit more about what that looks like and how we can identify if that's happening?
What I consider, or a lot of people will consider, that feeling of a normal reaction to life changes. So an example could be like, this is the first holiday without a loved one. This is the first holiday since my partner and I have separated, and my kids are going to be spending portions of their holiday with another relative. This is a hard time of year because of the things we've already talked about earlier, that, maybe job stress, financial stress. Those are all kind of what we consider maybe it's just happening with the season, and it's not setting and staying. As the season kind of gets over, we'll start to feel a little bit better. Another thing to kind of keep in consideration is some people notice that as we have less daylight, they start to notice their mood declines. And so if you're noticing, yes, that the holiday blues are kind of setting in, but my mood is still staying kind of declined, that might be another opportunity to kind of talk to your professional and see, like, is this a seasonal affective disorder? Is this depression that might be driven by less sunlight? And there are definitely things that your healthcare provider can help you understand, and then treatments to help you support you in that time of.
What is the impact on our mental and physical health when it comes to this kind of stress, whether we're talking about the short-term holiday blues or, just a limited amount of stress, or we're talking about something that is prolonged where we've identified, maybe it is time to seek help. But what are some of, the things that we can look for our physical and mental health?
The short term, you might notice that you are just that feeling of overwhelmed. Like, I have this list and I need to get it done. And it's, again, that quick and I can manage it. Or once I go and turn to my whatever's been useful. So I talk to my friends about it, or I write it down and I figure out what things I can or can't do. That's your short-term stress. And usually you're able to navigate it with helpful coping skills. And a lot of people already have, interchangeable that coping tools, the self-care, coping skills, whatever the word is that you're using for yourself. A lot of people have great ways of managing stress. And stress is, unfortunately or fortunately, one of the inevitable parts of life. We will all experience stress at some time. But when you get into that stress that's sticking around, that chronic stress that might need more help or more support, that you're going to start to feel basically that fatigue. And you may notice that your concentration isn't the same. You might notice difficulty paying attention at work. You might notice that your children, if they're experiencing some of their own forms of like anxiety or depression or prolonged stress, they might have difficulty with concentrating. You might see an academic decline for them. And then you might also notice your thoughts just seem slower. Someone might ask you a question. It might take you a little longer to respond. You're thinking like, I should know this, but maybe I'm struggling with answering. And then again, I feel like kids are really great at noticing this. You have your somatic or physical symptoms. Sometimes I find that adults may not be as in tune with, oh, that headache might be coming from this really prolonged stress, or the stomach aches that we might get. It might be coming from anxiety symptoms.
You mentioned somatic. Yeah, can you? There were two phrases in there. So for the lay people in us, can you explain what each of those are so we can help to identify?
Yeah, so somatic symptoms is just one of those ways that we say in my profession is just like, this is a body felt symptom. I'm feeling this somatic symptom in my body. It can be, again, that maybe there's not a known physical cause. So we can get sick to our stomachs because we have a virus or we ate something bad to that upset our stomach, but we can also get sick to our stomach because of stress. And so somatic is like, I'm experiencing this in my body and it's related to the stress that I'm actually experiencing. And there may not be a known, yes, this is a virus, like a known physical cause.
That makes sense. Okay. And we're talking about a lot of, things that could happen that create just the feeling of overwhelm and stress. Though holidays just in general can bring up feelings of loneliness, certainly of grief. Let's talk a little bit about identifying, those as the underlying cause of maybe the stress, and are there simple ways that we can cope when it comes to loneliness and grief during these times?
That is a really good question. With the loneliness, we know that that's one of the new things that we're talking about being a pandemic or epidemic among adults and adolescents that can be driving depression. So loneliness is just that feeling of disconnect from others. And part of the things that we can do to help us with loneliness is putting yourself out there more, being willing to say hi to somebody, strike up small conversations, joining activities in your community, trying to volunteer, and then also reconnecting with people through Zoom or FaceTime. Other social media platforms can be really helpful at times to help cope with loneliness. The other thing is grief. One of those inevitable parts of life is that we usually end up losing somebody we love at some point in time. And there will be a first Thanksgiving without a loved one or a first holiday season without a loved one. And one thing that we often suggest to people is, how do we keep their memory alive? So I was speaking to my coworker today, and she was talking about, her family lights 3 candles for the different loved ones that they have lost. They talk about good memories, and they do this every year. In my family, we try to keep recipes that certain family members have passed down, and we make sure that we're making them, and we're talking about, again, those stories and just kind of keeping that memory alive of the loved ones that we've lost. Again, first holiday seasons can be very hard, and it's going to come with what we call those mixed emotions. So we might feel glad to share those good memories, and then also very sad that they're not here with us.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
That's great advice. I wonder too, just talking about the expectations, because there are so many expectations that come with this time of year, whether it is as a parent in your kids or just with family, with work, all the things we've talked about. So are there some ways that we can, in a healthy way, manage the expectations that we put on ourselves and the expectations that others put on us? So first, the expectations that we put on ourselves. What are some of the things we can keep in mind?
I think if we go back to kind of exploring what's important to us about the holiday season, defining what you hope that your children might grow up with, the value system that's important, it changes our need to maybe buy the happiness for the holiday season, and we're able to kind of go back to, oh, I'm spending time with my family or spending time with my friends is really important about this time of year. And if we're able to recognize that's what's important, we kind of let go of some of those expectations of having my house look like, the perfect home, or having all the things done by ourselves, or again, like I gave the example earlier about like baking the recipes. Sometimes that may not be something that we can do this year. Maybe there's a time restraint. Maybe the grocery store didn't have a certain ingredient. So it's also being okay with being flexible when plans do need to change, and giving yourself that grace of saying, that's okay that I didn't do that this year. I'll try again next year.
Giving yourself grace, that is a huge, like maybe we should underline that point, because it's easy to say that now in the moment. That can be really tough, especially for people who are just naturally hard on themselves and want to have the home just right, the recipes just right, the gifts just right, plus wrapped just right. So if we could underline that point, I mean, that is a key takeaway, is just allowing ourselves some grace. If the house doesn't look perfect and you've got, 5 people, 10 people, whatever, coming over in the next hour.
And oftentimes too, when we talk about like the grace and having that, it's people don't remember if the table was set perfectly. They remember the conversation they had and that feeling of gratitude and happiness and connection with their family, and not necessarily if the rolls were overcooked or undercooked. It's being there with the family and your friends that are going to be what we're going to ruminate about or think about later on.
And maybe if they are overcooked, it becomes a great story to laugh about later. What about the expectations others put on us? Like, well, you host every year, so we'll be there at noon. And maybe it's not, you're not in the place to host this year, or whatever it might be. Maybe you organize the gifts for the family or something. Maybe that's not. How do you manage the expectations that others put upon you right now?
I go back to, if you can just say honestly what's going on, that's usually most helpful. So there's been a lot of changes, telling people, I know I host every year. This year, there's been a lot of changes. I need someone else to host, just giving them the understanding. But then at the same time, you don't have to do that. You can just be okay with setting that limit of, this year I won't be hosting, and you're under no obligation to explain that, which is kind of a hard thing, because we usually want to tell people why or do it anyways when we know that maybe there's a limit to what we can give or do this year. But generally speaking, I feel like if you're giving somebody the idea, this is why I'm setting this limit, this is what I'm asking for, people will be meeting you with kindness and understanding.
And maybe it's a different iteration of it. Maybe it becomes a potluck, because I can handle cleaning the house, but I can't handle cooking this year, or something like that. I want to talk a little bit too about financial pressure, because I think it's a point worth really hitting on. There are a number of financial expectations when it comes for many of us to the holidays, particularly for parents. And, I'm guilty of this. Like, what is the big toy? What is the big present? We've got to, what's the big thing we have? And then, the day before, like, do we have enough big things? So how do we sort of wrap our mind around, kind of coming to terms, we don't need to do that. And that's easier said than done. Trust me, I'm guilty of it myself. But how do we instill that for ourselves and our kids?
So it certainly is easier said than done. I think we all kind of sometimes, or most of us sometimes, get into that idea of like, I have to get more, or I bought my one child this many gifts and I need to compete with this child or give this child this many gifts. That's normal. That's a human reaction. I was thinking to myself, like, you had done the podcast before, I think, on Money Matters. So this is a really good opportunity to teach and instill that budget. and to get kids involved that's age appropriate to teaching them about, we're going to be really mindful about what we're buying this year. And then I like families to define what their values are for themselves. But then one of the things that I hear that's common now is putting more emphasis on the experiences as opposed to necessarily buying items. Or if you want to buy items, keeping things to the expressions like a need, a read, a wear, or a want, having kind of a theme with the holiday buying can be helpful. And then deciding if I'm going to be spending, do I have that disposable income to be spending? Or if I'm going to go into debt, do I have a plan to pay that off? That can give you some sort of feeling of okay, I can manage this instead of going into, I need to spend all this money on this, or losing sight of spending all this money and trying to, buy this, buy that, and making sure my kids have all the things. And when we ask people about what do you remember about childhood or the holidays, not a lot of kids or adults say, I remember exactly this toy, or I remember exactly this. There are a few of those items that we do think I have to have, and we do share and talk about later. But a lot of the times we're going back to the memories, the singing Christmas songs, or watching Christmas movies, or baking the cookies. It's the non-monetary things that seem to be the memories that stick with us more than the gifts that we give or the gifts that we receive, or the thoughtful gifts that we receive. Meaning, I know, a lot of moms will say it's the handmade gift, it's a handmade card, but there is data behind that. The thoughtful gifts that you write out something kind to somebody and really celebrate what you've loved about or grateful about having them in your life, can mean a lot, and help the children see that there are other ways to give outside of buying, and help you and kind of instill that practice for them.
Yeah, that's excellent. I so many of us just want to create that magical moment, the moment they come down the stairs. That is so much pressure. And to your point, there are other ways to create those magical moments, and really sort of proactively planning to feel like you have a sense of control over it to lessen the stress. That will help with the stress.
Yes, proactively planning and proactively budgeting. I know that for me, it feels like this year the holidays snuck up on me, and I have to say, I feel like that happens almost all years. But if you can also buy earlier, so if there are things that you're interested in, I know we can't rewind time, but if you're able to buy earlier, start thinking about small items. The other catch with that sometimes is buying earlier. If your kids change interests as quickly as mine do, you'll
yes.
I bought this in the spring thinking of you, and now you're into something different. So there can be a balance there, or maybe budget earlier for the buying later.
Oh yeah, those interests, and especially with the young ones, it's like a week out, they change their list. Theresa, if there was one takeaway from our conversation today that maybe parents can keep in mind as they move forward through the holidays, what do you think that should be?
It's okay to not have it be perfect. Really focusing on what's important to you. And when we go back and we talk to families about what brings you happiness, most often the positive is going to be seeing family and friends. So really focusing on what this season means to you and reframing things back into, this is what it really means to me. It doesn't have to be the things that that are stressing me, that I want to avoid, the hard things, but focusing on the positive of this season. Getting to spend a little bit more time with our family, getting to spend a little bit more time with our kids, getting to spend a little bit more time with maybe our friends too, really focusing on what that means for you.
Theresa, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. Of course, we'll have more resources on wgme.com/raisingme. Here's what I'm going to keep reminding myself of after talking to Theresa today, and I hope you will too. Go easy on yourself. Remember all the grace that she talked about? I totally get that is so much easier said than done, especially in the moment of whatever might be going on. But you're doing great. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfectly imperfect is okay too. It's better than okay, actually. It's great. And it's okay to get some help, whatever that might look like to you. Sometimes this is not just a funk that we can pull ourselves out of. And getting help might actually be the best thing that you can do, not only for yourself, but your family, especially this time of year. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield. We really appreciate a positive rating and review anywhere you get your podcast so that other people can find this message too. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.